Today, we're diving into a major review from Nature Review's Neuroscience. It's all about how tough experiences in childhood can actually change the very architecture of the brain, and in doing so, increase the risk for mental health disorders later in life. Okay, let's get into it. So, the big question this research really digs into is this: what is the actual biological link between a difficult childhood and later mental health struggles? How do these experiences get, well, under the skin and literally into our brain's circuitry? And make no mistake, the scale of this problem is just staggering. Globally, it's estimated that one half, of the world's children experience some kind of violence or abuse every single year. So you can see why understanding the brain science behind this isn't just an academic exercise. It is a critical public health emergency. So to start, we really need to get clear on what scientists mean by early adversity, and perhaps even more importantly, why the timing of these experiences is so absolutely crucial for a brain that's still under construction. You know, adversity isn't just one thing. As you can see here, it's this complex mix of different factors. First, you have the type. Is it psychosocial, like neglect, or biological, like malnutrition? Then there's the context. Is it happening within the family, or is it a wider societal issue? And finally, you have its specific features, like when it happened, how severe it was, and how long it lasted. All these things combine to create a unique impact. So why does that timing matter so much? Well, because the brain doesn't develop all at once. It develops in stages, and this chart shows it perfectly. Different systems, from your basic senses to your most complex thinking, have their own distinct sensitive periods. Think of these as windows of opportunity or vulnerability when the brain is incredibly plastic and just soaking up input from the world around it. Let's just lock in that definition. A sensitive period is simply a developmental phase when the brain is exceptionally malleable. Experiences during these times literally sculpt the neural circuits. So when the brain is expecting certain inputs, like a stable caregiver or the sound of language, and it doesn't get them, development can be seriously thrown off course. Okay, so we know when the brain is most vulnerable, but how exactly do scientists see these effects? Let's get into the evidence. Researchers mainly use two approaches that work together: animal models and human studies. Each of these gives us a different piece of the puzzle. Animal models are great because you can really control the environment and see cause and effect right down to the level of a single cell. The challenge, of course, is that a mouse's world is a lot simpler than ours. On the other hand, human studies are directly relevant, but we can't do experiments, so we rely on non-invasive brain scans, which mostly show us correlations. The real power comes when the findings from both start to tell the same story. And when we look at the data from human brain imaging, a really consistent pattern emerges. Time and again, early adversity is linked to changes in a core set of brain regions. We're talking about the prefrontal cortex, your brain's CEO, the amygdala, your threat detection system, the hippocampus, which is crucial for memory, and the striatum, which is involved in reward and motivation. And here's what's so powerful: these findings hold up across species. There's a remarkable agreement between the animal and human research. The same key brain regions are affected. The science is also showing that different kinds of adversity, like threat versus deprivation, leave distinct neurobiological signatures. And, as you might guess, the earlier the exposure and the longer it lasts, the more significant the changes tend to be. Now, it's not just about changes inside these brain regions. It's really about how they talk to each other. So let's look at how adversity affects the brain's large-scale communication networks. What you're looking at here is a map of the brain's major functional networks. And the crucial idea is that most mental health disorders aren't caused by a single broken spot in the brain. Instead, they're linked to specific patterns of what scientists call disconnectivity, which is just a way of saying there's altered communication within and between these critical networks. Let's break down a few of these network signatures. For mood-related problems, research points to too much chatter between the attention and salience networks, which might explain why a person gets stuck focusing on negative emotions. For psychosis, we see heightened connection between the salience and frontoparietal networks, potentially blurring the lines between internal thoughts and what's real. When it comes to fear and anxiety, it looks like there's overactivity within the frontoparietal network, almost like it's working overtime to manage perceived threats. And finally, for externalizing behaviors like aggression, studies find lower connectivity inside the default mode network, which is involved in self-reflection. So how do we pull all of this together? Well, the review's authors propose a really elegant framework that connects the dots, from the moment of an adverse experience all the way to an increased risk for a mental health disorder. And here it is, the whole conceptual model. It visualizes the entire chain of events. It starts with the adverse experience itself, which then leads to these specific changes in the brain's networks. And those neural changes are the very mechanism that elevates the risk for psychopathology down the line. To put it as simply as possible, it's a three-step process. First, the adverse experience happens. Second, that experience leads to measurable changes in how key brain networks, like the default mode, salience, and frontal parietal networks, communicate. And third, this altered brain wiring increases the statistical probability, the risk, of developing a mental health disorder. But, and this is the most important point of all, this pathway is not destiny. It is absolutely not a life sentence. The paper goes to great lengths to emphasize that at every single step along this path, resilience factors, things like a supportive relationship or an effective intervention, can change the trajectory. Risk is not the same as certainty. All right, we've covered a lot of ground. So what are the most important things to take away from this deep dive into the science? Let's just summarize the main points. First, early adversity disrupts the very environment the developing brain expects and needs to thrive. Second, its impact is most powerful during those sensitive periods when the brain is at its most plastic. Third, it leads to tangible changes in key brain regions that manage our emotions, memories, and choices. Fourth, these changes show up as altered communication patterns in the brain's major networks. And finally, and I can't say this enough, while this pathway increases risk, it is not a deterministic road. Resilience can and does rewrite the ending. We'll end with this. This science provides a clear biological reason why those early years are so incredibly foundational. It grounds our understanding of vulnerability and resilience in the brain itself. And as Nelson Mandela so powerfully put it, it reminds us of a fundamental societal responsibility. The question it leaves us with is, now that we have this knowledge, how do we do better to protect and support every developing brain?